Indeed, among low-paying occupations, construction work is arguably one of the worst. Just go home. The last words were spat at me in a disdainful tone. I slowly got to my feet and bowed deeply since I was at a loss for how to break through the tense, freezing environment. All right, I'll go home, I replied plainly before giving my friend Tom, who was planning the party, some cash. He shouted, "Wait." However, I grinned and walked out of the restaurant, into the now colder winter streets, without saying a word. As I headed home, I shivered. I was going somewhere the following day, looking dapper in a suit I hadn't worn in a while. I got to the main office of a big, well-known bank, a mega bank, to be exact. I used the highway to get here for a reason. I waited for half an hour after taking a number at the reception. When my number was finally called, the woman behind the counter gasped when she saw me coming. She questioned, "Why are you here?" "I'm 33 years old and go by Isaac." I married the woman I was seeing at the time, shortly after high school, and we had a daughter, Lily, at the age of 20. Like her mother, Aurelia, Lily, who turned 13 this year, has developed into a respectable young lady. She began middle school this year. In general, my work involves construction. I work in several different businesses, so it's challenging to focus on just one. However, there is no denying that it requires greater physical labor than office employment. I've never considered it to be difficult. I continue to do what I love because I enjoy it. I suppose I should tell you a little about my family. As I previously stated, I got married and had a child. But in actuality, Lily and I are the only ones living together. I'm a single father, to put it briefly. 3 years ago, Aurelia passed away from an illness. I will always remember that. Aurelia, whose name was associated with spring, was informed that she might have 6 more months to live. Cherry blossoms were Aurelia's favorite. We haven't missed a single cherry blossom viewing every year since we first started dating. The 3 of us, Lily, Aurelia, and I, were taking in the flowers in a well-known location that year as well. She abruptly mentioned how long her life would endure as everyone was enjoying Aurelia's prepared lunch as usual. Luckily, Lily didn't see our conversation because she was too occupied talking to some friends she ran into. "Are you sure it wasn't just a mistake?" I questioned Aurelia again after taking a deep breath. She nodded slowly. My breathing quickened as I felt as though I had been abruptly thrown into hell from the happy moment only a second before. I can very clearly recall my heart thumping so loudly that it was echoing in my ears. We'd agreed not to tell Lily just yet, so I went with Aurelia to the next doctor's appointment to find out more. The doctor said that only palliative treatment could be given because it was already too late. In the little time I have left, I want to make a lot of memories, Aurelia stated with a soft smile as I was overcome with hopelessness. Hearing those words, I almost wanted to blame her. Why would she say something so heartbreaking? Of course, I didn't actually say anything to her, but it felt as if she was preparing to leave us, and that thought alone made me sad. But rather than spending this limited time in despair, I wanted to make it a period Aurelia could look back on as meaningful. As this feeling grew stronger, we eventually told Lily, and the 3 of us spent time traveling and enjoying ourselves. Then, without reaching the season for our annual cherry blossom viewing, Aurelia passed away. Placing my hand on her peaceful face, as if she were just sleeping, I quietly let the words that welled up inside me slip out. "I never thought you'd leave so soon. What am I supposed to do? Our daughter is still just a 10-year-old kid. Without you, I don't know if I can raise her on my own." The 6-month prognosis was so sudden that I couldn't wrap my head around it, constantly asking myself what I should do, but no answer ever came. Even after the funeral, the 49 days of mourning, and the burial, I couldn't move forward. During that time, Lily, though still grieving, calmly accepted the reality of losing her mother and stayed by my side. "Dad, it's okay. Mom believed in you, so she became a star first. So Dad, Let's keep living just the two of us. Lily, she must have been just as lonely and sad as I was, but seeing her try to stay strong made me realize that I had to get back on my feet. Aurelia wouldn't have wanted to see me like this. She didn't choose to get sick, and even though she never showed weakness in front of us, the nurse told me she had often cried during the painful treatments. Let's take it one step at a time. I may not be as good at cooking or housework as Mom was, but I'll do my best for both of us. I'll always be with you, Dad, so you never feel lonely. So 3 years have passed since we lost her, and Lily and I have been doing our best together. There were times when I felt like giving up or looked back with regret, especially when Aurelia's birthday or the anniversary of her death approached. But even during those tough times, I managed to get through, thanks to Lily's encouragement. These 3 years have been hard, but they were also important for deepening the bond between us. I never really believed that time could heal. But after 3 years, my body had gradually gotten used to living without her. Little by little, I found myself living as I had before Aurelia passed away. Around that time, I got invited to a group mixer. Technically, my friend Tom just asked me, "Let's go out for drinks. It's been a while." But when I showed up, it turned out to be a mixer. Since Lily was away for a 2-night, 3-day club training camp, I figured it wouldn't hurt to go out. I had no intention of meeting anyone new. My heart still belonged solely to Aurelia, but Tom, worried about me after seeing how down I'd been, thought that since 3 years had passed, it might be time for me to move on, and that's why he invited me. He was genuinely worried about me, a single dad raising a teenage daughter, and thought it might be good for me to meet someone who could become a mother figure. When he apologized, saying, "Sorry for being nosy," with eyes like an abandoned puppy, I just couldn't turn him down. So I decided to participate, not to find a new partner, but just to enjoy a good meal. And then the day of the mixer arrived. The venue was a high-end French restaurant, fancier than I had expected, and I couldn't help but feel that even the outfit I prepared for the occasion seemed lacking. We were told the women would be arriving soon, so we waited for a while. Eventually, a group of professionally dressed women, looking sharp and competent, walked in wearing dazzling dresses. Not bad quality. I'm not sure if any of them are a match for me, but this lineup isn't too bad, Rachel said as she popped down onto a chair without any hesitation. My friends, watching her behavior, had strange expressions on their faces. Just as I was wondering what was going on, my phone vibrated inside my bag. That's when I found out her name and realized she wasn't originally invited. Tom, the organizer, exchanged a quick glance with the woman who seemed to be organizing on the women's side. They both stepped out for a moment and then returned. My phone vibrated again, and I checked to see a message saying Rachel had just shown up uninvited. Tom sent a message saying that, and I got the sense that Rachel wasn't particularly welcome, that she was someone with some kind of issue. Unaware of the exchange going on behind the scenes, Rachel glanced at me with a sly smile. Then she bluntly declared, "There's one person here dressed pretty poorly. Is he just here to make up the numbers? Even if that's the case, he could have at least worn something decent." Feeling mocked, I instinctively furrowed my brows, and she just shrugged her shoulders, giving me a disdainful look. When the mixer started, it began with the usual stuff. Introductions, talking about hobbies and special skills. Nothing too serious, but it was lively. What I quickly learned was that all the women were bank employees. They had all graduated from prestigious universities, ones whose names most people would recognize, and they all worked at the megabank. The woman on the left, who was quite popular with the guys, had a gentle and easygoing aura. The one in the middle seemed a bit shy and didn't initiate conversations, but she answered politely when asked, which made her quite well liked. The problem was the woman on the right, Rachel. This is so boring. I guess guys really like those cutesy, soft-spoken girls. Huh. Personally, I think they're just putting on an act. Oh, and I'm not talking about you two. Okay. If I made you think that, I'm sorry. I just tend to say what I'm thinking, so people often misunderstand me. Even though no one had asked, she started talking and brought down the mood. She claimed not to be bad-mouthing the other two women, but it was clear that her words were filled with hostility toward them. Her blatant attitude and flimsy excuses were just exhausting to listen to. No wonder Tom, the organizer, had that strained expression when he saw Rachel. Surely, no one would want to engage with this kind of conversation. Seeing that no one responded, Rachel's cheerful expression from earlier turned stern, and she spoke in a tone as if scolding a subordinate. "What are you saying? I said something wrong. I just pointed out that guys who like manipulative, cutesy girls are questionable. Those types usually have nasty personalities anyway, so I was just trying to warn you. But now I'm the bad one." Oh, why are men always drawn to such obvious fakes? After that, Rachel stopped talking altogether. No one else dared to start a conversation with her. As time went on, she seemed to get bored. She started admiring her nails with a dreamy look, appearing completely uninterested in the mixer. 20 minutes later, Rachel, noticing something I was wearing, suddenly grinned and spoke up after a long silence. "Oh, Isaac, are you really participating in a mixer even though you're married?" Suddenly, all eyes were on me. More accurately, the women's eyes were glued to the ring shining on my left ring finger. It's a custom piece, one of a kind in the world. I had turned Aurelia's ring into a necklace, which Lily carries with her every day. The guys knew the situation, but the women didn't, and their gazes turned judgmental. That's when Tom hurriedly stepped in to explain. He told them that my wife had passed away, and that I was raising my daughter, Lily, on my own. The other women seemed to understand, and their eyes softened, mixing understanding with sympathy. But Rachel just muttered, "Oh," and turned away, as if completely uninterested now. She had drawn attention to me, scoffing as if to mock me, and now she was acting like she didn't care at all. If she bothered to ask, she should at least take responsibility and listen to the end. That sudden loss of interest in just a few words really irritated me. "Can't you be a bit more considerate with your words?" I asked. Rachel's eyes widened at my words. She probably never expected me to talk back. "What do you mean? I'm just the kind of person who always speaks her mind." "What, are you telling me to live my life pretending and lying like those cutesy girls do, saying, 'Wow, amazing and still cool' to everyone?" "That's not what I meant," I replied, finally reaching my limit. "Yes, I admit that wearing this ring could have caused some misunderstanding, and that's on me. But your attitude just now, don't you think it's a bit much? I'm not saying you should act like you're at work and be all polite, but it wouldn't hurt to at least practice some basic manners." Rachel's face turned bright red. It seemed she hadn't realized how condescending she had been, and being called out must have been quite embarrassing for her. "Are you seriously lecturing me? You, of all people. Just because you're lonely after your wife died, you think you can come to a mixer. You've got no right to judge me at that." Tom quickly intervened. He kept insisting it was his fault for dragging me there and pleaded not to blame me. He hadn't invited me to find a partner, but just to help me take a break. So if anyone was to be blamed, it should be him. But Rachel didn't listen at all. Seriously though, coming to a mixer with that attitude is just rude. Sure, maybe she had a point, but everyone has their own reasons for attending these things. Some people genuinely look for a match, while others just come along for good food and a bit of socializing. Besides, judging from the atmosphere, except for Rachel, the other two women, and my two friends seemed to be getting along quite well. So I couldn't help but feel like things were actually going fine. Rachel didn't seem like she was actually looking for a partner, and I wasn't either. In that sense, the mixer seemed to be working out just fine. But even so, Rachel continued to assert her own sense of righteousness. I only came because the original girl wasn't feeling well. I have no interest in guys who are beneath me, and I don't want them talking to me either. So stop trying to lecture me or call me down. It just disgusts me. Saying that, Rachel sank back into her chair, crossed her legs, and looked at me with a haughty expression. No one could say a word, and the atmosphere was getting unbearably tense. That's when the woman on the left tried to change the subject. Since it was already established that all the women were bank employees, the conversation shifted to talking about our jobs. Aside from me, the other guys were ordinary office workers, but they clearly had high social status and earned well compared to others their age. For women, marriage and pregnancy might mean temporarily putting their careers on hold. In such situations, having a partner with a stable income would provide peace of mind, allowing them to focus on childbirth and raising children. Perhaps because of that, the two women seemed to enjoy chatting with my friends. Since I wasn't interested in anyone other than my late wife, I just focused on enjoying the food and drinks while the four of them got along. After a while, my friends had pretty much exhausted the job-related topics, and the conversation hit a brief lull. Then, unexpectedly, the conversation shifted to me. When they asked what I did for work, I answered honestly. If I had to say, I guess I do construction work. The moment I said it, the mood in the room noticeably became heavier, especially Rachel, who had shown no interest in me earlier. Suddenly, she froze for some reason. She furrowed her brows deeply and glared at the food in front of her. I could pretty much guess why the atmosphere turned like this. After all, my friends next to me worked in major real estate and trading companies, so I knew I didn't quite measure up. Since the women looked uneasy, I decided to elaborate. Construction work isn't all I do. I have a middle school daughter, so I work somewhere that offers a bit of flexibility. It's just that most of my tasks happen to involve construction, so that's why I put it that way. There was a reason I deliberately used the phrase, if I had to say. My work spans many areas, and when I tried to pick just one to describe it, construction work happened to be the first that came to mind. Hearing my explanation, the women seemed to understand. There's definitely a bias some people have against manual labor jobs like construction. For example, large corporations and mega banks are highly selective, accessible only to a limited number of people. Often, academic background plays a major role in screening, leading to a biased view toward manual labor companies, which generally welcome anyone willing to work hard. I wondered if I should have kept quiet, but I figured being vague would only seem suspicious. Then the woman in the middle spoke up in a small voice. I think it's wonderful to do physical labor that helps others. She was probably doing her best to be encouraging. I didn't need the encouragement since I take pride in my job, but being told something supportive reminded me of how Aurelia used to cheer me on. It felt nice. The woman on the left also seemed to realize something and echoed a similar sentiment. After seeing their initial reactions, I knew their words were probably just polite remarks. Still, I was impressed by their ability to consider others' feelings. Just as expected from elite bankers. Meanwhile, Rachel just kept staring at me. I thought she was going to say something spiteful, but she remained silent. Feeling uneasy under her gaze, I couldn't help but ask, "You have something to say?" Rachel let out a deep sigh and then spoke. People who can only do manual labor usually aren't very bright, right? They're only stuck in those jobs because they lack education, but they act so full of themselves. It's really irritating. If you want to lecture me, at least graduate from a prestigious university that everyone's heard of first. What was she trying to say? That question was answered almost immediately after finishing her harsh, prejudiced rant. Rachel let out a sigh, and then with the corners of her mouth curling into a spiteful grin, she said something outrageous. I mean, construction work is practically one of the worst of the low-end jobs. There's no way someone like you would ever match up with us elite bankers. If you didn't come here to actually find a partner, you're just being a nuisance. Seriously, organizer, can you not invite people like him next time? It's such a buzzkill. Just go home. Her final words were thrown at me with a tone full of contempt. Objectively speaking, Rachel was undeniably attractive. Actually, all the women here were quite good-looking, and I honestly felt a bit out of place from the start. But hearing Rachel say it outright just didn't sit right with me. If I had said it as a self-deprecating joke, it would have been one thing, but coming from her, it was clearly a statement meant to look down on me. The silence that followed was even heavier than when I first mentioned working in construction. The other women, unsure of how to react, looked visibly uncomfortable. Rachel was already difficult to deal with as it was. Even the woman who organized the date on the women's side probably didn't expect Rachel to show up as a substitute. It was clear that Rachel was not well liked by those around her. Not knowing how to break the ice in the cold, tense atmosphere, I slowly stood up and bowed deeply. "All right, I'll head home," I said honestly, then handed some money to Tom, who was organizing the party. He called out, "Wait." But without saying anything, I smiled and left the restaurant, walking through the winter streets, which felt even colder now. I shivered as I made my way home. The next day, dressed sharply in a suit I hadn't worn in a long time, I was heading to a certain place. I glanced up at the branches of a nearby tree. It was still cold with no buds in sight, but in a few months, beautiful pink flowers would be blooming here. I really wanted to walk down this path with you again. Today is an important day, and I need to put in some extra effort. I'm a bit nervous, but I'll do my best. My phone's lock screen has always been a photo of Aurelia since we started dating. Taking pictures of her natural, genuine smile had almost become a hobby for me. Now that I couldn't do that anymore, it hurt. I unlocked my phone and opened the camera roll. For the longest time, it had been filled with photos of Aurelia, but after a certain point, things changed. After Lily was born, the gallery was filled with pictures of Aurelia and Lily. Whenever we traveled or enjoyed delicious food, I'd snap a few photos, but 90% of them were family pictures. Feeling encouraged by those memories, I gave a small nod and kept walking. I finally arrived at my destination, a well-known major bank, specifically the Megabank's main branch. There was a reason I took the highway to get here. I took a number at the reception and waited for about 30 minutes. Since it was a Monday and the counters were crowded, I hadn't made a reservation, so I had to wait quite a bit. When my number was finally called, I approached the counter, and the woman there gasped as soon as she saw me. "Why are you here?" Rachel stared at me, completely dumbfounded, like a pigeon struck by a slingshot. Most of the customers at this Megabank's main branch were either company owners, both large and small, or individuals with substantial assets. Of course, there were ordinary customers as well, but they typically used branch offices rather than the main one. Since I was using the corporate reception, Rachel seemed to instantly realize something. With a trembling voice, she spoke, "What brings you here today?" Her tone was clearly filled with a sense of fear, as if she were regretting her behavior from the previous night. Without paying any attention to Rachel's reaction, I calmly stated my business. "I'm here to close a company account." "Close the account." When she asked for more details, I gave her the company name, and the next moment, Rachel let out a shocked cry. "No way. You're the head of that company." "Yes, that's right, though I only took over about 6 months ago from the previous president, my late wife's father. So, it makes sense you wouldn't know. I usually leave the bank-related tasks to my staff, but I figured you might have at least heard that the president had changed." Rachel gave a small, hesitant nod. She was probably calculating in her head what kind of impact my company closing its account would have on the bank. The assets my company held in this mega bank amounted to roughly $400 million. When Rachel pulled up the account information on her computer, she seemed to grasp the situation, her eyes widening as if they were about to pop out. She was completely frozen at that moment. Another bank employee, who had been listening nearby, turned pale, stood up abruptly, and rushed to the back office. A short while later, the woman returned, this time with a man following behind her. He, too, looked completely pale. Isaac, I heard that our staff, Rachel, acted extremely disrespectfully toward you. The man speaking was Rachel's direct supervisor. Apparently, the bank's president, Mr. Martin, was out on business, making the supervisor the highest-ranking person present. The woman who had fetched the supervisor earlier probably didn't know what Rachel had done. However, when I mentioned closing the account worth nearly $400 million, and considering Rachel's panicked expression and the snippets of our conversation, she must have reported that Rachel had done something terrible. Rachel, visibly trembling, wore an expression of pure fear. Anyone would feel intimidated upon realizing they had been disrespectful to someone important enough to make their boss bow down. We deeply apologize, Rachel. Come on, urged her supervisor. Rachel hurriedly bowed her head. I'm very sorry for being so rude yesterday. I didn't know whether her apology was sincere, but at least she didn't stubbornly cling to her pride and offered a proper apology, which was something. After pretending to think for a moment, I asked Rachel a question. When I mentioned that I worked in construction, you seemed lost in thought, looking quite serious. After that, your attitude became even sharper. What was that all about? Rachel was at a loss for words, stumbling over fragmented sounds like and But perhaps realizing that she needed to speak up to move past the situation, she began to speak slowly and deliberately. The truth is, my father was also a single dad. He worked as a construction laborer. Rachel said that her mother had left because she couldn't stand her husband's low income. For some reason, Rachel was left behind, and from then on, it became a single-parent household. Apparently, even though her father's income wasn't so low that they couldn't make ends meet, his reckless spending habits and debt had been the real problem. With a sigh, Rachel continued to talk about her father's past. He was terrible with money and got buried in debt. My mom worked hard to support the family, but I guess she eventually hit her limit. One day, she just disappeared. From that point on, we had to survive solely on my dad's wages while paying off his debts. It was hell. They managed to secure food, clothing, and shelter, but Rachel couldn't have the kind of childhood where she got new clothes or went out with friends. To save off hunger, she would chew on sour seaweed snacks even after the flavor was gone. Growing up like that, she made up her mind to never become like her father. At the same time, she began to look down on people working in construction-related jobs. This was purely her own prejudice, but it was also rooted in Rachel's painful experiences from her past. So while I couldn't completely dismiss it, I still felt it was wrong for her to direct her resentment toward me, who had nothing to do with it. You saw your father in me because I'm also a single dad raising a daughter, but you don't need to worry. It's true that I've been involved in construction and related work to prepare for taking over the company. However, I am now leading the company as its president. I earn a stable income and make sure to allocate enough budget for the employees' welfare. Hearing this, Rachel lowered her gaze and fell silent. After a few seconds of silence, she spoke up again, her voice filled with remorse. You're right. I'm sorry. My father, whom I've cut ties with recently, contacted me asking for money. He said that since he'd let me attend a private high school, I should pay him back. But I only got into that school through recommendations and a scholarship. I guess I took out my frustration on you. I'm sorry. Rachel's supervisor, having listened to the whole story, declared that Rachel would face disciplinary action since I was an important client. Making me feel uncomfortable couldn't go unpunished. However, I shook my head. Punishing her won't solve the root of the problem. Besides, she explained her situation and sincerely apologized. I believe that last apology came from her heart. Rachel, what do you really want to do? Rachel fell silent, deep in thought, before softly whispering, I want to change, not just myself, but my father too. I think he's still struggling even now. Despite everything, he was a kind man. His dependence on alcohol has made things worse, but cutting ties with him without helping might have been part of the problem. Seeing Rachel speak with a determined look in her eyes, I nodded. Then with that commitment, let's put yesterday's incident and today's account closure behind us. Do your best, Rachel. Rachel nodded in agreement, and her supervisor and the other bank staff breathed a collective sigh of relief. After that, I returned to my usual routine. Lily came home from her training camp exhausted, immediately raiding the fridge for ice cream. Yay, my favorite ice cream. She happily munched on a chocolate-covered ice cream bar, her face beaming with satisfaction. Seeing her like that reminded me so much of Aurelia. Aurelia had also loved chocolate, always choosing it for dessert wherever we went. Looking at Lily, it was like a mirror image of Aurelia. I knew I couldn't consider a remarriage. I made up my mind not to attend any more mixers and to continue spending peaceful days with just Lily. But there was one thing that kept lingering in my mind. It was about Rachel and her father. Since that day, I hadn't been back to the bank, so I had no idea what had happened to them. Being a single dad raising a daughter, I could understand some of the struggles and hardships her father might have faced. I could understand, to some extent, the part about turning to alcohol as an escape. However, I decided that as an outsider, it wasn't my place to meddle in Rachel and her father's issues, so I chose not to ask any further. A few months passed, and it was late March. The cherry blossom blooming announcement had already been made, and the trees were in full bloom. Many people were walking around, gazing up at the flowers. They're so beautiful this year too, Dad. I can't wait to eat that lunch. Hold on now, let's not rush. Let's enjoy the view of the cherry blossom path a bit more first. As usual, Lily and I had come to see the cherry blossoms together. As we walked through the bustling tourist spot, something caught my eye, someone who stood out to me. It wasn't that they were particularly noticeable to others, but to me they were. I saw Rachel walking with an elderly man with gray hair, who was sitting in a wheelchair. Though I couldn't hear their conversation, the atmosphere around them was calm, and Rachel's expression seemed softer and more relaxed. I'm sure good things will happen for you too. Gently brushing a cherry blossom petal off Lily's head, I murmured to their retreating backs.